Welcome to Monday Night Comics. Welcome to Comics with Dan. StreamYard recently changed their format so that the free plan doesn't allow me to play my intro video anymore, and I'm too cheap to upgrade it. So this is the new intro, me just talking about it. Uh, on on the show tonight, I have a repeat guest, our very first guest, actually. From all the way back in episode number 2, and we're on episode 18. So please welcome David Pepose.
Hi. Thank you so much for
What's going
having
on,
me,
David?
Dan. So excited to catch up with you today and talk all things comics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really glad because Mad Cave sent me some stuff, and it was supposed to come on Wednesday, and I was worried that it was going to get here in time for our talk, but it came today. And so I got in the mail here, I got my signed copy of the free comic book day issue, which is great because my shop they either ran out real quick or didn't get in the free comic book day issue. So I read the digital version of it, but this is my very own physical copy, which I'm very excited about. And then we also have this. Yeah. And we also have this handkerchief.
Oh, yeah, that's neat.
It's very nice. Very nice. I'm sure you probably have one or two of these laying around. Or did they not get you any?
No, I'll have to check. I was traveling internationally recently for my sister's wedding, and so I have not actually unboxed all my mail yet. So I have to check. I may have one. I'm not sure though.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, it's pretty cool to see the promotions and stuff like that because
it's super cool.
I mean, getting stuff hyped for the show or for the upcoming issue. So I'm excited. So it comes out at the end of the month. Do you just want to take a quick second to tell anyone watching kind of people know what Speed Racer is in general, but maybe talk a little bit to what people can expect, kind of what it's about, just the elevator pitch.
Yeah, the way that I've pitched Speed Racer is it's Rocky in a race car. And so we're going to see Speed go from sort of his heroic journey from winning these illegal back alley street races in his tricked out car, the Mach 5, to actually joining the Formula X League in his road to becoming a champion. And sort of the stakes, the personal stakes for him, not just that he loves racing and he lives and breathes it, although he does, but there's some very personal stakes that mean that there's no room for second place for him. He has to win. Otherwise, the consequences are going to be dire. And so it's been really fun to be able to explore that character. I'm about a third of the way through my planned run so far on it in terms of writing it. You know, we've got 16 including the 0 issue. So a 16 issue run already planned. And so it's been really fun to be able to explore Speed and his supporting cast and the universe, and being able to kind of give his various competition in Formula X their own distinct personalities and cars and gadgets. And so it's been a nice way to sort of have my cake and eat it too, in terms of the elevated bits of Speed Racer, you know, particularly the Mach 5 and all the fun gadgets. And we're going to be showing how all the different cars in Formula X have their own individual X factor to them, but still keeping, I think, the stakes personal and keeping them grounded and really making it clear that like Speed Racer is the type of person you could see out there in the real world. And hopefully people will really resonate with him and his personality and, you know, the dynamics that he has with his supporting cast and hopefully his growth along the way.
Yeah. No. And I think that between issue 0 and issue 1, I feel like issue 0 did a really good job of setting the tone, because I wasn't quite sure what we were going to get, right? Because obviously the old cartoon, and then there was a manga for a long time that had a very classic tone, an older tone, something that, I mean, maybe you could keep that same thing in modern times, but also you know, it's definitely due for an update. Let's put it that way. Sure. So I really felt that issue 0 set that tone really well. It puts you into the world
Thank you.
of Speed Racer, and then issue number 1 is where we get the stakes, right?
Yeah.
This is where we see all the different all the different problems that Speed's going to face, and sort of where the story's going to go. It was a great setup issue. I really enjoyed it. And so like I was saying, the original series or the original show came out in like the 60s, and then there was the manga in the 60s. So you had to have some kind of updates unless you were going to kind of set the story in the past.
Sure.
So what kind of took you in the direction of the sort of like TikTok live streaming, with Spritel being that social media personality? What kind of took you in that direction?
Well, it's one of those things. I really approached Speed Racer in a very similar way that I approached Space Ghost, which is I don't feel like there's anything broken about the concept. I think it really does not take too much polish to make it shine for a modern audience. And so for me, all of this is about the hero's journey, and so I know there were a few people when they read the book, they were like, oh, is it all going to be street racing? And no, that's not it at all. But I think a core part of Speed Racer, even from dating for the original cartoon, is his father, Pops Racer, who's this like legendary car designer and mechanic, does not want Speed to race. That's like a core part of it. That's like the core drama of those original episodes. Pops doesn't want Speed to race, and yet Speed, that's something he lives and breathes because he worships his brother Rex. And so we wanted to show Speed kind of coming up from this like unlikely beginning. His father won't let him race in Formula X. Fine, he's going to do like the illegal back alley thing. And what was so interesting, doing an issue 0 and an issue 1 was an interesting challenge for me because ostensibly I've read issue 0s on Free Comic Book Day that are either just a teaser or worse, are kind of like they're basically an issue 1. And then you read the real issue 1 and then you're suddenly lost. And that's something I wanted to make sure we tried to avoid, is that for people who did read our issue 0, you get a nice table setting, you get a nice teaser, you get a sense of what the world is, and you get a sense of how we're going to choreograph and pace the action, me and David Tinto. But we also wanted issue 1 to actually work as an issue 1 and stand on its own 2 feet. So it was an interesting challenge of essentially writing 2 number 1s, that both still worked as a number 1. But to answer your question about Spritel in particular, I watched every episode of Speed Racer to do my homework for this. Same way that I did for Space Ghost. I think for me, that's the only way I can approach the thing honestly, is to be able to sort of assess, like, what are the bones of this? What's the thing that makes Speed Racer timeless? What are the elements that people are going to, have expectations for? But then also, what are the different characters that we can sort of put our own unique twist, our own modern spin on it? And I hopefully I'm not talking out of school with it, but I feel like Spritel was the one core element that like was maybe the most dated. It's very much a product of its time. I think if you tried to play Spritel from the way he was in the original cartoon, if you tried to play him that way today, it would probably rub people the wrong way. So, for me, I was trying to figure out in a similar way that we did for Jan and Jace over in Space Ghost, how do we give this supporting cast member some agency? That like he feels like his own character. The way I have approached all of Speed Racer's supporting cast is they all love racing. They all have this strong, passionate bond for it, which I think is something that I can relate to. I'm sure you can relate to, as like a fan of comics. That's something that I just live and breathe and eat and sleep. We all love the same thing, but we come at it from different angles. And so Speed is a driver, and he loves driving. It's his passion. It's his skill. He's like the Michael Jordan of speed racing. Of street racing, I should say. But he's also kind of chasing his brother Rex's ghost. Like that's sort of his way of honoring Rex. Pops, meanwhile, like he was a designer. That's how he approached that love. And of course, he's got this deep conflict now because racing took his oldest son from him. And he doesn't want the same thing to happen to another son. Meanwhile, Trixie, as you'll see as the series continues, she's the Carol Ferris to Speed's Hal Jordan. She owns a race car team, and so for her, it's about family legacy. So she and Speed, their paths parallel each other in a nice way. And of course, Racer X, for him, racing is a vehicle for revenge. It's a way for him to sort of balance the scales for the criminal elements that have infiltrated Formula X. And so for Spritel, the thing that really stood out to me was like, oh, he's the color commentator. He's not necessarily the guy you're going to see behind the wheel, but he's the one who's so passionate and is able to kind of do the play-by-play in such an interesting way. It really worked not just as a structural tool, to sort of like lead readers as to what's going on, but it also kind of was a way to like give Spritel his own voice. And so it his own like unique thing to do. So he wound up being a really fun character, I think, because in the Zero issue, he really does kind of like anchor that opening chunk of it. But I love Spritel as a character, not just because of the live streaming, although I thought that was a nice way to lean into how precocious he is. And it will that curiosity will put him in some precarious situations as the series continues. Almost like a pint-sized Lois Lane. But I love the fact that like it really does speak to who he is as a character. Like, he really is he's like Speed minus the damage in a lot of ways. Speed, he's carrying this core tragedy of he lost his brother Rex. Spritel was really too young for this to register. And so, he actually sees Speed in the same way that Speed saw Rex. But, he's just seeing him with hope. He's just seeing him with enthusiasm. He's just seeing him as like an aspirational figure. And so I think that's really cool, like to kind of give Speed that little element of like joy, unbridled joy. And I think that balances nicely for sort of this like brooding Hamlet on wheels figure that we've sort of put Speed as. So, Spritel wound up going from being, I think, my biggest challenge to like one of my favorite characters. So he's a real fun one to write.
Yeah. No, and it definitely comes through because he's funny each panel, right? I mean, like you can't help but laugh at like how goofy he's being, but he obviously is, like you said, very passionate about it too, right? So it's not like he's he's kind of messing with Speed a little bit in terms of like, look, I doubled your winnings. And then Speed's like, well, why is it short then? Like, which is just like they have that cool kind of like I'll mess with you, you mess with me relationship, which I like a lot. So, and I think kind of a recurring thing that we're seeing, right? Both in what you've already discussed tonight and in the first part of your Space Ghost run. And really all throughout it is like a focus on the family theme, right? Approached obviously in a different way. I would consider Space Ghost more of like a found family type of thing, but Speed Racer, it's all more blood related. Why is this something that you think comes up so frequently in your work, and what is it that kind of pointed you in that direction again here?
Some of it is like just like the core parts, I like I said, like I watched all the original episodes and part of that was to just try to figure out like, what's this thing really about? And so for Space Ghost, what struck me was that it wasn't like Batman, where you can tell a Batman story without Robin and it still feels natural. Like you meet Jan and Jace before you meet Space Ghost. So it really is, they're a core ensemble, but we never really saw how they like came to be. So that felt like an interesting story for me of like, the found family. Whereas like Speed, in a certain ways, it's sort of an opposite, or maybe like a parallel theme in that the family's already together, but it's a broken family. And so I think so much of this series is how do you rebuild this family, and it's through, the lens of racing. I think for me, it's a great question of why do these themes appeal to me so much? And I think there's a couple reasons why. I think it really does speak to the way I grew up. To tell you a little bit about my family dynamic, I grew up, my younger siblings are triplets. but we
Mm.
have like about a 9-year gap between us. And I think
Oh, okay.
that really kind of shaped the way that I view stories, and that I knew what it was like to be by myself for a long time.
Mm.
So, like me finding my friends, I have a lot of lifelong friends because that was my way of surviving, before my
Mm.
siblings were born. But at the same time, my siblings, they're the product of like when IVF was new. That the lengths my parents went to have more kids. I think the idea of family feels very core and important to me. And my younger siblings have such distinct personalities. We're all related, but like we're all very, very different people, and I think
Mm.
that's what makes my family interesting,
Mhm.
and unique. And so I think those family bonds, those family groups, the personalities kind of bouncing off each other. That's something I've always grown up with, and I think that's something that's really interesting. And as a writer, it's proven to be really fun to be able to address. I mean, I think for me, that's how I triangulate a story. I think, it's very easy to like get stuck in the mud if you're dealing with one character that doesn't have like a supporting cast.
Mhm.
Whereas I've been really fortunate in that Speed Racer and Space Ghost, the supporting cast is very robust.
Mm.
And so you're able to kind of like ping pong storylines off of like the personality clashes, the evolution and relationships. Um, and so, yeah, I think both of these books have really kind of scratched my own personal storytelling itches. And in a similar way to even like Captain Planet, where you've got that
Mhm.
very robust Planeteer group that is able to kind of
Mhm.
play off each other. Yeah, it makes my job a lot easier as a writer to have
Mm.
such, I think, compelling personalities in the same book. Um, because, yeah, I don't think you can tell a Speed Racer story if you don't have Trixie and Spritle and Pops and Racer X. I think that's, without doing that, you're missing like the cherry or the banana or the ice cream in the ice cream sundae. So yeah, it really is. I think it comes as part of the package. So it's been really fun to get to explore.
Yeah. No, and I love the ice cream analogy because like you're absolutely right. Like, I mean, speed is the ice cream, and ice cream by itself is fine,
Yeah.
but it's much better with all those other things.
Yeah, exactly,
So,
exactly. It really is. Uh, you know, it's a gift as a writer to be able to work with something that has a lot of these supporting cast members, because otherwise it is an uphill battle because then you have to really introduce them yourself.
mm,
And sometimes sometimes people don't you don't know if people will accept that. You know,
right.
I somebody who I think did a really great job of building that whole cloth. I'm going on a tangent, but you see Jed McKay on Moon Knight, where
Mm.
like Moon Knight did
Mm.
not really have like a stable core supporting cast, and so Jed built it himself, and
Mhm.
it worked out really, obviously, really, really well. So but that's a tough road to hoe. So I feel very fortunate to be working on 3 books that like the supporting cast is already there, so I can just hit the ground running rather than having to sort of like build them up whole cloth.
Yeah, yeah. And so like and since like you have done superhero work as well,
Sure.
like Marvel superhero work.
Mhm.
Um do you feel that getting the supporting cast of characters I guess true to their original iterations. Obviously superhero fans are extraordinarily picky about that. To a, I don't want to say almost to a fault, definitely to a fault. Like people
Sure.
get insane about it. Do you feel that you get that same kind of feedback, we'll say, from these kind of characters?
So far, no. And
Okay.
I think because I think about this a lot. I talk about this with my close friends a lot. In that superheroes are ubiquitous. Like
Mm,
they've been telling Spider-Man stories month in and month out for 60 plus years,
mhm,
and so there are fans. I think superhero fans can sometimes be a little bit more purist, and I
mhm,
totally understand why that is. Like when you grow up with these characters, you feel that protectiveness,
mhm,
and you feel that sense of ownership. And you it's like going to your favorite restaurant. You want to get the thing that you want to get, And so, if you tinker with the recipe too much, people get prickly. Whereas I think the advantage of working on the nostalgia books that I've been working on is, they haven't really been that thoroughly explored. It really is virgin territory. And I think that works in a number of different ways, in that, first off, people aren't as familiar with all the tropes and all the characters, so they're actually a little more present. They're willing to be surprised by all this, which is what everybody wants in a comic, is that, they don't want to be able to predict it. They want to be able to just like be in the moment and sort of go on the ride. But we have fans, myself included, who have like encyclopedic knowledges of all the superhero universes. It makes it a lot easier. Well, it becomes a lose-lose, because either you guess what it is in advance, and then the surprise is lost, or you don't guess it right, and then you say, well, that didn't add up. That's not the way I would have done it. And so, it becomes like a little bit of a breeding ground for cynicism. Whereas like these older properties that have laid fallow for so long, like people are like, oh, like Space Ghost, Speed Racer, Captain Planet. Like, I remember what that looked like when I was a kid. How do you make that like modern for like for today's sophisticated audiences? And so, yeah, I think people almost exclusively have been really excited. Seeing what we've been doing on all three of these books. And of course, every once in a while you'll get a nitpick. Somebody will say they don't like Captain Planet with a beard, or like they are saying, why is Speed Racer street racing? Is that going to be the whole book? And you can only just say, like, be patient. Like, I mean, Cap's keeping his beard, but like Speed is not going to be on the streets the whole time. We are going to see his adventures on and off the track, because I think that like just gives us a lot more different stories to play around with. But like, I don't think you can tell this isn't the Fast and the Furious. Like I know we're drawing little bits of that in our DNA, but like Speed is a champion race car driver. Like, you need to, like, it's a competition. It's a sports book in a lot of ways, in an industry that isn't necessarily kind to sports books. But I think the Speed Racer name, and I think the fact that we're able to kind of weave in the little bits of the crime intrigue in all this, like, and just seeing, David Tinto's like amazing artwork on this, like he's really selling every single page of this. So yeah, I think it's definitely very different than writing superheroes, but I think ultimately, like, at least for me as a reader, like I like having that diversity of content. Like, of course, I love superheroes. I'm reading Marvel and DC every Wednesday. But also, like, it's nice to read Image. It's nice to read Boom. Nice to read IDW, and of course the books of Dynamite. Like, so yeah, it's kind of nice to like go against the grain a little bit with these books, and hopefully, ultimately my goal is to build trust with readers. I think this business is a trust business, and every time that you put out a book that hits the marks, people will start to say, okay, like I can unclench a little bit. I can trust the ride. I know that it's going somewhere, and that I like where it's going so far. So I'll probably like where it's headed. And so that's kind of my goal for these books. And that's why I consider like Space Ghost and Speed Racer such a gift, is that we've been given long runways on these books. And so I think that not only lets me tell a longer story, but I think, like I said, I think it lets us build trust with the readership, that they know month in and month out, like, hey, I'm going to get a cool Speed Racer story. Hey, I'm going to get a cool Space Ghost story. And by the virtue of us doing primarily done in ones and done in twos in both books, that means that like people are going to be able to like really cycle through a whole bunch of adventures and hopefully feel an increased sense of investment in our characters.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. And like you said, like it's not only like breathing new life into these characters, because like, I mean, like Space Ghost, I'm trying to think, because like obviously there was the DC like mini series that they did, which I did love, but
yeah,
before that, I mean, like my first introduction to Space Ghost was like I was staying up too late and watching Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
Sure.
Like
That was mine
that
too.
was my first, yeah. And so like everyone has different different introductions to these characters. And like Speed Racer, like I've only ever known him from the like maybe one or two episodes of the old show that I've seen, and he's like this goofy little guy in his round helmet and like you know and
Yes.
so
Screaming, oh,
yeah.
yeah.
And being able to take that and modernize it and is incredible. So
You, it's funny. It's almost a year to the day that Mad Cave first approached me about Speed Racer.
okay.
Chaz Pangburn, our editor on the book, pulled me aside at last year's San Diego to ask
Okay.
to tell me that Mad Cave had picked up the rights and would I have any
Mm.
interest. And I mean, you see it in I don't know if you've seen Formula One yet. Really fun movie.
Okay.
People were really underestimating how much money that movie was going to make. I want to say like domestically, it's either domestic or full gross. It's like right up there with Sinners right now in terms of like the sheer crazy amount of money it's been making. And I think it's simple. People love fast cars. Like it's super cool. And I can tell you that was certainly the initial draw for me was, when Chaz pulled me aside and said, how would you feel about Speed Racer? Like I love writing car chases in comics. I've done it dating back to my very first books. Spencer and Locke and Spencer and Locke 2 both have a big car chase centerpiece and a set piece in both of those books. I love being able to convey motion and speed and intensity in a static medium like comics. How do we kind of trick the reader into sort of feeling that even though it's on the printed page? So the opportunity to be able to do this for 16 months straight, I was like, I'm never going to get that opportunity again in comics. It'll never happen. So, like I think there's just something intrinsically cool about like a book about a race car driver. And it, then sort of the icing on top was like, oh, he's a really fun character. I said it earlier, and I'm not trying to sound too hoity-toity about it, but he really does. He's kind of like a Hamlet figure, I think, in a lot of ways. Like Speed, he's got these deep, intense passions that also, the flip side of the coin is like he broods, and he's got these deep emotions, and that's a fun character to get to explore, like somebody who he feels the weight of the world on his shoulders and he feels put upon, but he's also got these like raging like post-teenage hormones, I guess like college age hormones, like he's got a lot to learn, but he thinks he knows everything. Like
Right.
that's a fun character to get to follow, because like then, just like everybody growing up, you get the wind kicked out of you every so often. And how do you get back up? How do you sort of get back in the driver's seat? And I think the answer for Speed is, you lean on and you learn from all these people in your corner, whether it's Trixie, whether it's Racer X, whether it's Pops. And so like, yeah, I'm very fond of Speed. I think he's right up there with like Jan and Jace and the Planeteers as like characters that I just like adore writing. You guys are in for a treat.
Yeah, no, I mean it's great setup so far, and I'm excited to see where it goes for sure. I'm not going to go any further to say, but I don't know anything about Speed Racer prior to this, right? Like I mean like very minimal, and so I did look up something that I think caused a spoiler for me, and I will message you what it is later. But
Okay.
I have a feeling that I mean, just because, you're staying true to the original in terms of the core, I think you're going in the same direction. But that's all I'm going to say.
There are a couple little things that I tried to kind of like tee up from the very beginning. And, so you'll see things like the car acrobatic team, from the very beginning. And we've got some really cool stuff down the pike. Like Captain Terror is probably one of my favorite Speed Racer villains, even though he's only in
Okay.
like, I think he was in like 1 episode or 2 episodes.
Okay.
That's like I love that guy as like, he's like the Red Baron of the track, like,
Okay.
and we've built a whole backstory for him that's like really interesting. That he's sort of like the overarching villain of like the whole thing. So you'll get to see where we're coming from that in issue 2. But stuff like that, like you'll see the Great Mammoth car, the GRX engine, the Milan,
Yeah.
and so I was really trying to tee up as much stuff as I could from the jump. Just to let people know, like, we've planned this. I've planned this series with literally a page to page basis all the way until the end. So all that's left is the scripting, and so we've got a lot of fun plans. And like I said, because all of these books, every story is either a done in 1 or a done in 2. Like, we've got a lot to cover on this. So you're going to see like a real like who's who of competitors. And we mentioned it in issue 0, but the cool thing about Formula X, and this was my way of circling the square of how does the Mach 5 work. That was my second biggest challenge behind Spritel, was I was like, I don't want it to seem like Speed cheats. Got the gadgets in the Mach 5. He's got the auto jacks, and he's got the cutter blades, the defensor shield, and the belt tires. And I was like, okay, but if he's the only one who has these things, then sort of like, it's like a boxer with weighted gloves. So how do you make it feel equal? And so the way that I kind of came about doing it was, all the cars have like certain things. They all have the belt tires, they all have the auto jacks, they all have the defensor shields, but then every car has its own X factor. And so Speed has the buzzsaw, but another car might have like a firecracker rocket launcher. Another car might have a rivet gun. And so giving each of the competitors their own personality through like their car design, but also their weapons, like it's a little bit it's a little Street Fighter, I guess, but it was just like a cool way to kind of do that short. Yeah, you see the page right over there. And so that was my way of circling that square. And so you'll see that there are certain cars that are particularly powerful and are going to give the Mach 5 and the Shooting Star a run for their money.
Yeah. No, that's definitely, and see, I didn't even realize, because like I knew that like the Mach 5, like that's one of the like couple things I knew about Speed Racer, is that he had the Mach 5. I didn't realize that all the other cars having their X factor was something that you had kind of brought to the table. So that's a cool way to do that.
Yeah, because I think the original cartoon, it was basically just like the Mach 5 all tricked out versus like a bunch of normal race cars. Right. And watching it, I was like, I'd be winning a lot of races too if I could do all these extra things that my competitors couldn't. So that was sort of my way of, I think, like evening the playing field a little bit,
right,
and also making it just, I think, even more dynamic and interesting. Is that like, when you have cars that can drive on walls, or if Speed dodges an attack using the auto jacks, that sort of makes the racing, it gives it a lot of different dimensions, on top of just like the battle bots of it all, where they're able to bring each other down using their various weapons. So it's sort of, I think it makes this series' kind of core sport stand out from what you would normally see in NASCAR or Formula One or things like that. It just adds a little unpredictability, and it gives me more things to do in terms of the choreography. So it's a win-win.
Yeah. And so like, it's interesting because that you say like it's just the Mach 5 all tricked out and beaten up on these regular cars. I have been seeing clips of Speed Racer just like on social media lately. I don't know if it's like the algorithms in my business and knows I've been like looking into Speed Racer or what, or if it's like just people are seeing it because your issue number 1's coming out. Have you seen the stop crying clip from Speed Racer that's been going around lately?
No. Is this from the animated or from the movie?
It's from the animated.
Okay. Oh yeah, I do remember this episode.
Oh wait, hold on. Let me see if I can make sure I can.
Sometimes Speed was a menace in the original cartoon.
Yeah. I don't know if this is going to work or not. Oh wait, no, I have it muted. That's why.
Oh, I can hear it.
Oh, can you?
Yeah.
All right.
Stop crying. It won't do any good. And anyway, you have a lot of work to do starting right now.
That kills me. Get up. Stop crying.
And I'm pretty sure if I remember the episode correctly, it was like after like his dad was like killed, like in the middle of an adventure. Like it was one of those moments that like or like is injured or something. Like I'm pretty sure that's the episode that felt honestly the most like a Space Ghost episode to me, where it was like somebody had like his own like mechanical amusement park. It was with like it was an interesting thing to say the least. But yeah, Speed, Speed. Let's see, Speed helped like the U.S. government colonize like a Native American reservation in one episode. Like,
oh wow,
like got involved in like multiple different countries, like foreign affairs. We're not doing that in the book, but there were certainly some episodes that might have been a little eyebrow raising if they came out. But I think like that's part of the reason also why you want to do the homework and watch everything is like like just to kind of like know where the potential pitfalls are. And also, it was a good, reinforcement for me. I think it would be very easy and very tempting to try to go bigger than what I think this series is meant to be in terms of like the scale and in terms of like, I mean, there's a world where you could certainly do a Speed Racer comic that's much more action adventure. I mean, there was a lot of James Bond influence in that original cartoon. And for me, that's a story that like, if I tried it, I think would kind of dilute, I think, the core appeal, which like it's a race car driver. Like race cars are cool. And just kind of like following his hero's journey is cool. You don't need to do like, a terrorist is like about to like take over, like, is threatening the world's governments or what have you. There's enough interesting, if anything, I would say this is the thing I love most about writing Speed Racers. It really is. It's so easy when I'm writing superheroes to lean on certain tropes, as like a crutch. I think we all do it as superhero writers. Like, the stakes have to be world shaking. And I think a book like Speed Racer, it's like these stakes are very human. They're very personal. Speed's not saving the world, but he is saving his family, like, and I think, those stakes are valid. And, I think it's easy to lose sight of things like that, but particularly when, all you're writing is superheroes. So it's nice to have a book like this that like you're really kind of focusing on like the human drama, and that the superpowers, I mean, I guess you have them in the various cars, but these are flesh and blood people that, they deal with human problems. They, and human drama and human intrigue. And I think that is a good refresher lesson. And I think that's something that like we could stand to bring in all of our books.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the Gatchaman series that Mad Cave released over the last year and a half or so, maybe 2 years, I guess. So they've explored various parts of that universe, and one of the things I really like about it is that they've explored it through not only the main series but various miniseries, one shots, and a lot of those books have just added so much great depth and interesting background. I know we have the Racer X miniseries. I believe Mark Russell is writing that.
Yep.
It's coming in September, but are there any other miniseries or one shots that you're kind of hoping for, or that we can expect on the horizon, that sort of thing?
Well, we also have a Tales from the Road anthology.
Oh, okay.
That'll be telling different stories from like around the Speed Racer universe in a variety of kind of different tones. I know Mark London, our publisher, is going to be writing a Racer X story. It's like a very classic, like action packed, like James Bond on wheels kind of like Racer X story. And then I've actually got a Spritle and Chim Chim backup.
Nice.
Spritle Racer's Day Off is Spritle taking a little joyride in the Mach 5, and chaos ensues. So we've got those three to start, but I think there could be a variety of really cool stuff. I think Trixie has a really interesting story, and she's such a fun character to write. She really is kind of like the heart of the book, I think, in a lot of ways. And already just writing that first issue where she and Speed meet for the first time, that was a highlight of that issue for me. I think coming off of writing Cable, Love, and Chrome, which was so romance driven, I feel like I was in the headspace for it, but I feel like I might have even done a better job having trying it with these flesh and blood characters. I feel like Spritle and Chim Chim are super fun. I feel like there could be a lot done with them, whether it's sort of in our universe or if it's like a more classic take. I honestly like Captain Terror would be kind of fun. As like sort of like the villain of the thing. Like, what were his exploits early on that made him sort of this corporate and racing titan. So he would be really fun. I will say David Tinto, our amazing artist on the book, has delivered an all-time killer redesign of Captain Terror.
Okay.
It's choice. But yeah, I think I'm really excited to kind of see where it goes with all that. I know I've read a few of Mark's Racer X scripts, and the way he's kind of approaching it is like he's telling Rex's story, but also there are moments that kind of weave into narrative and what's going on, sort of seeing that from Rex's perspective. So Mark's got a really interesting take on the character, and I think Nuno Plati, I think, is the artist in that book, and he's a really talented artist as well. So I'm really excited to check that book out. I think it's going to be really fun. I mean, the goal for both of these books is that like you can certainly read Speed Racer on its own. I'm fairly certain you'd be able to read Racer X on its own. But if you decide you want to read both, then it's sort of like, oh, you see Racer X, like, oh, that's an angle from the main story that I hadn't considered.
Yeah.
So it's really neat. I know Mark is kind of doing some stuff involving Rex being his father's son. And that, like, for him, like, not only is he sort of like the heavy of Formula X, the guy with the all-time crash record count, but like he sees racing as a design problem, and so he's going to be doing some really interesting stuff. Whereas like we're sticking pretty straight with the Mach 5, the Shooting Star is going to see, I think, a variety of different iterations. And so Mark's doing some really interesting and cool stuff with all that.
Nice. Yeah. So as I think we've mentioned it, I think most of these, but so for Mad Cave, you've done The Devil That Wears My Face, and now Speed Racer, Space Ghost and Captain Planet with Dynamite, and plenty of Marvel work. But so what are some of the differences? I mean, there's obviously got to be a different dynamic when working with Mad Cave or Dynamite versus working with Marvel. And then what do you see as the comics industry evolves? how do you see publishers that are small but established, like Mad Cave and Dynamite?
Mm-hmm.
How do you see them fitting into the future of comics?
Yeah. Well, I think it really is honestly, I know people talk about sort of like a publisher to publisher difference, and there are differences for sure, but I think it's also an editor to editor difference, and every editor kind of like has their own way of doing things and their own tenor. Like Tom Brevoort, for example, over at Marvel, who's been my primary editor on almost everything over there. That guy is like a savant. Like that guy has like for all the plates that he's spinning, he's got like laser guided storytelling instincts. And so I he's even when I'm not working on a book for him, I can sort of like kind of hear his voice over my shoulder, like whenever I'm working on something or whenever I'm watching something and being like, Tom wouldn't let me get away with that. Joe Rybant, meanwhile, like he my Space Ghost and Captain Planet editor, he's very much open to sort of like, okay, like what, like he gives us a lot of freedom. It's very much just like if we need something to like bounce off of him, he'll answer it. And he's always very online in terms of not like Twitter or anything, but just like I can send him an email in the middle of the night, with a script, and like, within a few hours, even if it's like super late on the East Coast, like he's like, received, great. He's very good at sort of keeping the trains on the track and keeping everything moving on time, and sometimes giving me a kick in the butt if I'm running behind on the script. Chaz Pangburn, meanwhile, our Speed Racer editor, he really deserves like a medal because he's really like the connecting tissue, but between everything going on Speed Racer, and he really has sort of worked as a conduit, in terms of all the members of the creative team, but also just like, between all the different books. And so I really admire and appreciate, in a lot of ways, I think the thing he has in common with Tom, Chaz has a lot of books on his plate and he's working all the time, but like, I never feel like that my book's a statistic to him. Like, I think I get the sense that he genuinely cares about these things, which, that doesn't always happen in comics. People got to get stuff out the door. And so sometimes things just, don't always necessarily get like the care that maybe I would want them to. And so, having an editor that cares, having an editor that like will go the extra mile with you, that is a huge gift. And so I've been really fortunate that I'm working with 3 editors that have allowed me to do that. But yeah, I think, in terms of like the publishers and their dynamics and their tenors, of course, like Marvel's like the big dog, in the industry. And so for that, you have to really kind of like be very aware of like, what else is coming out in any particular week, and sort of how can you promote your own work to try to stand out amidst a fairly crowded crowd, and also like, of course, like there's, I think the ongoing horse trading of just like, what character can I use, or am I going to write a story that like somebody else is kind of doing in another title, and you don't know the answers to those questions. That's a big part of your editor's job, is to sort of run things up the flagpole, and they're the ones that know where all the bodies are buried. And if they don't know where the bodies are buried, they can ask Tom. He knows where all the bodies are buried for sure. And so you kind of play the 20 questions of like, hey, can I use this villain? Oh no, somebody else is using this villain. Okay, like what's a villain that like, is free and available? That I think is the biggest challenge, and I think the biggest difference of working at a big 2 company is that like you do have to, in some form or fashion, kind of take into consideration what everybody else is doing, and oftentimes you won't know what that is. So you have to think of plan B and plan C and plan D. Whereas like Dynamite and Mad Cave, there's less consideration that needed for that. Like Space Ghost, for example, I don't have to like get approval from anybody about like, do I want to use Zorak?
Right.
Like I mean, we have to get, of course, licensor approval on things, but Warner Brothers has been like such a perfect licensor to work with. They've given us a ton of freedom. They understand and I think like what we're doing, with these books. So like they've really given us. I haven't gotten like a note from Warner Brothers in many months. They're good to go with stuff. Mad Cave, it's very similar, it's a little different working with Tatsunoko because like they're halfway around the world, so like there's sometimes like a little bit of a time delay. But and also like Tatsunoko, like they are they're excellent resources in terms of like they know Speed Racer in and out, like they live and breathe this stuff. So they're really good if like I have a question of like, hey, like what's a Japanese name that I could use in this, for this particular character, because like, for example, Inspector Detector, like fun character, but like that name, maybe doesn't feel the most organic. So like, what's like a Japanese name in the canon that I can use instead? Things like that. So, but I think they also like, they're very, they believe in the talent. I will say the thing about Mad Cave that I love, I should say, talking about tenor, is they're I would say the most creator friendly publisher I've ever worked with. I think it starts from the top down. Mark London, every time I see Mark, he's happy to be there. He's happy to talk with the creators. Every single person who works at Mad Cave that I've met is like not just happy to be there, but it's almost like a sigh of relief that they're there. Like so I will say like that starts at the top and like works its way down. Like I will say that like, and Mad Cave's entire staff is like really on top of things, and they have a big staff for being a relatively smaller publisher, and they're very proactive. The fact that like they sent out, a little thing to you, the fact that like, they set up signings, they set up panels, they I had never done a marketing meeting with a publisher about a book until I worked at Batcave, and they had like a whole Zoom meeting with a bunch of people where we were talking about like, what is this book about? How do we market this thing properly? What are like the comp titles? Like something that a lot of other publishers just don't have the staff or the bandwidth to do. So Mad Cave is a really creator friendly place for sure. Not to say that my other publishers, again, Dynamite's great. They're very streamlined. They have got a very small staff. I think they have a staff of like less than 30. It's but at the same time, I can email Joe Rybant and I know I'll get an email from him the next day. And same thing, Marvel, like again, I'm really lucky. I've worked with Tom Brevoort, who, he knows where all the bodies are buried, but like, if I email Tom, I know no matter how busy he is, he'll get back to me, which is like, not everybody can do that, especially at his level. So, every publisher's kind of got its own vibe, its own unique way of doing things. But I think to answer your more important question, which is like, how does like a place like Dynamite or Mad Cave fit in the industry? And I think, like the direct market's always going to be built on superheroes. Marvel and DC are, of course, like kind of the most popular genres, at this point. But I think people, they are going to want other things. We talked earlier about they want properties that they don't know as well, that they might be surprised by, stuff that's a little bit more off the beaten path. Or, in the case of Speed Racer, a genre that Marvel and DC might not publish. It's very similar to the reason why like Image is so successful, or any their own book is so successful, that people love superheroes, but they also, if all they do are superheroes, I mean, well, I shouldn't say that. There are some people who love superheroes and that's all they want to read, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think, at least for me, in my experience, having read comics for 35 plus years at this point. You know, like I love my superheroes, but if that's all I read, I'd get sick of them. You know, it needs to be, I think, other things. You know, so I think as a reader, it's really important to diversify. And so, you know, places like Mad Cave and Dynamite are really helpful in that regard. But I think also, you know, these things, you know, that's how like even the big two continues to like maintain relevance, is that like they need people to come in with fresh takes and fresh ideas and fresh ways of doing things, whether it's genre or whether it's the way that they tell their stories. I mean, you see, you know, I think a great example is somebody like Chris Condon, really nice guy, very unassuming. The thing that I've really noticed having read his work, you know, like I love that Texas Blood because of the way that he paced it, and that you've got these emotional beats, but the way that he kind of weaves in and out, the way that he introduces the dialogue, the way that he uses silence, you know, it's very interesting. You know, you see artists who work like Chris Somney who work with negative space. I've never seen a writer do that before until Chris. You know, and so yeah, you know, like that's the reason why he's writing Ultimate Wolverine and absolutely crushing it on that book, because he figured out his approach on that Texas Blood. You know, and so I do think like you need that degree of cross pollination, like for both sides to kind of, you know, for both sides to really remain fruitful. Because what happens is that you have an indie person, they go to the big leagues, they bring their approach to the big leagues. Hopefully it kind of sticks and it does something interesting. And then they take that added fan base and then they bring it back to their creator owned work. And then their creator owned work gets that much more eyes on it. So, you know, and I could make a similar argument between Kickstarter and the direct market for that matter, you know, or self-publishing in the direct market. So, yeah, I think you need to have a functioning ecosystem. I think you need not just like the big names, although the big names are good, but you do need kind of the mid-tier and the more indie houses, I think, just to kind of like keep things interesting. Now, I mean, the industry is evolving. You use that word, and yeah, I think we're, you know, I don't know what things are going to look like in the next 6 to 12 months. I mean, you know, I think everybody's looking at like the ongoing Diamond stuff with, you know, I think some bated breath, you know, but also just like, you know, things, there's always going to be different things. I mean, you know, 2 years ago, you wouldn't have expected a new Ultimates line that, you know, or the Absolute line, which is like, you know, really energizing the industry. You wouldn't have expected a brand new X-Men relaunch. You know, you wouldn't have expected, you know, the push that DC's putting on the Superman titles. You know, I mean, maybe you would have guessed that with the Superman movie coming out, but you know, like, you know, you wouldn't have expected 3 years ago for Daniel Warren Johnson to be like a consistent, like top 20 seller with Transformers of all things, you know. You know, for
He's
like
wild.
2 years running, that's like, that is impressive. You know, and so like every year there's going to be something new and interesting, and of course there's going to be like the cool, interesting stuff, and then there's going to be like the industry setbacks and things kind of like, you know, shaking themselves up, and then, you know, hopefully finding a little bit of equilibrium. But I think having these kind of smaller publishers, as long as they can kind of weather that out, and you know, everything I've heard from my particular publishers, you know, like I'm still writing. Nobody's told me pencils down on anything, you know, and so, you know, you got to have faith that like everything will work out, you know, in the macro. But I think having these smaller publishers, it's just a way to kind of keep that circulation of interest going in the industry and in the medium, and in terms of talent kind of coming and going. So I think they're very important. I think they're indispensable, I would say. And I would say ultimately that like the industry, if someplace like Dynamite or Mad Cave didn't exist in the industry, somebody would have made it, you know?
Right.
Like, and you do see that. You do see a cycling of, you know, like I wrote a book at Aftershock, you know, and Aftershock is more or less. I mean, they're not active at the moment. So,
right.
I got my start at Action Lab, like, which is obviously a defunct publisher at this point. So, things come and go, but I do think like that type of mid-tier and indie level of publisher, like I think there's a need for it in the industry. So I think they'll last as long as we have an industry to have them in.
Yeah. No, and I mean, like, to your point about, like you said, there's plenty of people that just read superheroes, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I find myself going through like phases.
Yeah.
I'll go several months without even seeing Batman, and then I'll go a couple weeks where I literally read nothing but Batman.
Sure. Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, yeah, things like that. But I really love the way that you mentioned the like with Chris Condon about the bringing not even just ideas but styles, and like basically like sharpening his saw in the smaller books and bringing it to the big two. Because and I don't know if maybe you'll agree with this, maybe you won't, but I think that on occasion you'll see that maybe big two books are less likely to take risks.
Sure.
Just because like these are obviously beloved characters, there's that you don't want to do anything that could potentially, ruin anything. But if it's time tested elsewhere, then they can, bring that, And another person I was thinking of was James Tynion.
Yeah.
I mean, watching him take his creator work and then applying that to Big Two is great. And so now he's back at, I mean, I don't know if he's doing anything Big Two at the moment, but he has about 1,000 different things going on.
Yeah, he's super
Creator
prolific.
owned.
In the creator owned sphere. Yeah, I mean, or you see like Dennis Camp, like like you can see that evolution from 20th Century Men. Honestly, you can even see that, in some of his earlier work. Like I remember his Bloodshot was excellent.
Okay.
Criminally underrated. And you can see that through line. You can see the through line from those two books to like Ultimates and Martian Manhunter, and then you sort of see him bring sort of that very experimental streak from Absolute Martian Manhunter, and then really crank it into high gear with the Sordid Crisis events. So I think you are able to kind of like, yes, you are able to kind of like stretch yourself to the limit with creator owned. Because who do you don't have to get approvals from anybody. And also I think another thing that is maybe overlooked is 9 times out of 10, at least for almost every experience I've had for creator owned, you have more control over the actual finished product, because not only do you usually have a little bit more lead time, but also you typically have a little bit more say over like who you're working with. So like, for example, working on The Devil That Wears My Face, like I was able to say like, hey, who'd be a really good fit for this book is Alex Cormack, and having Alex made that book, not only that, but he and I were able to kind of like talk out the whole book just because we knew each other, and so Alex would turn in his pages and the editors would be like, you have any thoughts? I'm like, oh, Alex already knows what I think. Like I've already talked to him. Whereas like for Big Two stuff, like it is sort of, it's a confluence of not only what does the editor think would be like a decent fit for the book, but also like who's available, who fits on the budget, like who do I like working with? And so I think that can sometimes make the outcomes, they can hew a little bit more towards the status quo, just because like literally that's just like what it looks like by the end of the day. So I think like having the creator owned side of things, like you are able to sort of push the envelope a little harder, just because like it's usually you and your artist just talking. But I mean that, and I think I'm trying to remember who said this. maybe it's Bendis or maybe it's Jerry Duggan. I don't know. Everyone was saying, they were saying like making a comic in general, from like a comic that you see in your in your comic shop, it's a miracle. It's a miracle that the thing was made. Now, whether or not you like it or not, it's still a miracle. But
Right.
then to have a comic that's good, that
Mm.
people like, that people resonate with, that's like a double miracle, you know?
Right.
And there's so many different things that are out of everyone's control, or things that like you see in hindsight that you're like, oh, okay, or things that, you know, things that you get overruled on, you know?
Mm.
And you know, that's the thing, is this is a team sport, and so ultimately you kind of go with where your team kind of goes in the aggregate, and sometimes you have more control and sometimes you don't. But I think ultimately, like, it's so much better to cut your teeth. Well, I mean, that's the reason why you cut your teeth in the creator-owned sphere now, is that like you're able to sort of figure out your voice, you're able to make your mistakes, but you're also able to sort of like figure out what your style is, because then once you go into the bigger big two sphere, there's a lot of different, there's a confluence of different factors that go into every book that just wouldn't be a thing in a creator owned book. And so you got to learn to kind of like ride the wave. And if you don't know how to write a book, if you don't feel confident in your voice, if you don't feel secure enough in your style, at least to go on to the next level, like, I can tell you that if I didn't feel good about the way that I wrote, if I didn't feel like I had some sort of process, I would have just drowned at Marvel. You know, like, uh, even my first books there, which were challenging, you know, like, I never thought I couldn't do it. But if
Right.
I had like a year less of experience, like, you know, when you find out at the end of your first arc that like Conan's gone, you know, like, I had the experience to be able to roll with that and say like, okay, like, here's a good escape hatch, and we need a new lead character. I think we can do Punisher 2099. You know, with less experience, I probably would have just freaked out, you know.
Right. Right.
Need that kind of training, I think, to then work in some of the bigger picture stuff. But I think it's always good to go back to that creator owned stuff, because that's what I think kind of keeps sharpening your skills for licensed work like Marvel or DC, or even, you know, stuff like Space Ghost or Captain Planet and Speed Racer.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I'd be interested to see like if there and maybe not maybe it would be a more recent trend, but I would be interested to see if there is a trend with I guess books being successful in the indie space or in the small publisher space that are trying new things that then shows a resurgence, or I guess not a resurgence, but a prevalence of that happening in big two, right? So like you were saying with, I think Denise Camp is the perfect example to where he took 20th Century Men to Ultimates to Assorted Crisis Events. It's exactly what we were saying. But I wonder if that exists on like a macro level where you could even plot out like these books were successful at this time, and then we see the ideas getting applied across the industry, you know, years after.
I was just thinking about that earlier today, actually. And it's not exactly what you're talking about, but like, for example, like Grant Morrison's Batman run. You know, like, I feel like the idea of everything counts, you know, and the sort of this maximalist take on the Batman mythos, you can see like a through line to that, to, you know, the stuff that like Dan Slott did in his Amazing Spider-Man run, going from, you know, big time to Superior to like Spider-Verse, you know, like, you see like that idea of like taking all the threads of continuity and like, you know, bringing them together. I think that book was probably a bigger game changer than I think anyone really realized at that moment. You know, that's certainly a big one that springs to mind. But I think in terms of other like trends, you know, James Tynion did a really interesting job with that. introducing Punchline. And I know that's like kind of a little bit of a smaller trend, but like you saw for a little while there that there was like, a streak of kind of buzzy new villains that like the goal was like, how do you make their first appearance so cool that people flock to buy that first appearance, and then it boosts the sales. I think in terms of like storytelling techniques, like even like I can say like for me, like seeing like Roberto Aguirre Sacasa, on Afterlife with Archie, and Ed Brubaker on Criminal Last of the Innocent, that was, you can see a direct line to that and like Spencer and Locke, I don't know if that's necessarily like a wider trend, but like, so I don't know. In terms of like, I think the thing is that in terms of creator owned stuff right now, and I think this is the silver bullet that everyone's looking for, is there hasn't been a book that has dominated the conversation in the way that like when Chew came out, or when anything that Brian K. Vaughan has done, or Walking Dead or Invincible. Like, I don't know if there's a book that like has captured the full industry's attention in that way yet. I guess the closest you could say is like, you can see that the connecting thread between like Ice Cream Man and Assorted Crisis Events, and like Hello Darkness, and the various EC comic stuff that like Oni's doing. But I think by virtue of it being anthologies, there's no like core thing to take from it beyond like, I think the tone and the structure. So I'd be curious. Yeah. Like, I don't know. You see a lot of crossovers, but that's, I think, like maybe the opposite of what we're talking about.
Kind of.
Those they're fun, but like, I think those, you can see like there's a sales kind of component to something. So yeah, I think the only other trend I would say honestly is like seeing the rise of these nostalgia books. Daniel Warren Johnson really kind of like set the tone with Transformers, and then you see Declan Shalvey doing that with Thundercats, and you see Josh Williamson on G.I. Joe. And I feel very fortunate to kind of be part of that crew with Space Ghost and Captain Planet and Speed Racer. But I do think like Daniel Warren Johnson, that might be maybe the most recent trend, is people seeing from him, oh, hey, these don't have to be cash grabs. They can be good. They can be like actual statements of artistic intent. It can be just as valid as bringing a creator-owned voice to a Big Two book. And while of course they're not going to have like the level of exposure that like a Big Two book would, I think anybody who's willing to go off the beaten path a little bit, they can see Space Ghost and be like, oh, hey, like, I think that book, can stand alongside anything at the Big Two. And so I think maybe that's the latest trend. But you're right. Like, I'm curious to see if there's anything in the creator-owned sphere. I think if anybody would do it, it'd probably be Denise Camp, but like, whose voice is so singular that it winds up sort of spawning like a wave of imitators. Alan Moore did that in the 80s. Frank Miller, I should say. Also, myself included. I love Frank Miller. But yeah, I'm curious. I'd be curious to see like who's the creator-owned book, who's the creator-owned voice that kind of like dominates in the way that like a Grant Morrison or a Mark Miller did like a generation ago.
You got to wonder if, I almost wonder if there are a bunch of Jonathan Hickman impersonators out there that just can't quite get it. You got to wonder. Because like, and like there are bigger Hickman fans than I am, right? Like I think he's obviously a master of his craft.
I can't believe I didn't mention Hickman. Yeah, talk about yes. House of X and Powers of X it's a generational win. It's a generational just home run of a series, but also like a redefinition of the whole line. I think constantly like, God, I wish I was as smart as Jonathan Hickman. What I would do to be able to like write something to that level, to that scale, to that level of quality. Yes, I would love to see a bunch of Jonathan Hickman imitators. I think we all just are afraid that we're not smart enough.
Well, and that's what I'm saying is that like maybe people are trying to imitate him and they just can't capture it, you know?
Yeah, I mean,
But
nobody can
yeah,
do it like Hickman. Boy,
yeah,
I'm a huge fan of his work. He's a
yeah,
really smart guy.
yeah.
And yeah, I think talking about taking that creator-owned vibe and bringing it to the
Hmm.
superhero sphere. I can't believe I didn't think of him, but I think that's the guy. You
Yeah, and
know,
I don't know about like the timing of all his stuff. Like I know what a good bit of his work is, but like did East of West happen before he was doing Big Two stuff or in the middle of that? I know that
I think it was in the
that's a
middle.
really big
I want
creator
to
owned one.
say it was. I think it might have been during his Avengers run.
Okay.
I
Okay.
don't. I think his Fantastic Four run had already wrapped, but I could be wrong. It could have been during Fantastic, but it
Yeah.
was definitely somewhere in that general neck of the
Right.
woods.
Right.
But like stuff like um, the Nightly News, the Red Wing, Manhattan Projects. I feel like
Mhm.
Manhattan Projects was maybe he was working on Fantastic Four at that point, but that was pretty early
Okay.
on, I think,
Right.
in his Marvel career, and you see kind of these sprawling, long form kind of story ideas early on there in his particular voice, and I think the how detailed and intricate he world builds. Like you sort of
Mhm.
see the infographics even in those. You know,
Yeah.
and I do think that's I think a core part. I've never met him. I've never spoken with him, so this is all conjecture on my part. But like, I feel like if you like, that has to be like a way that he like builds out the world to himself, even.
Mm.
Like I think when
Yeah.
you have such a granular level of detail, and he comes from a design background, like it makes
Mm.
sense.
Yeah.
That being part of his approach. So yeah, I think he's probably the guy who, whether or not we've acknowledged it, maybe because there hasn't been a wave of imitators, because none of us can do
Mm.
it, but I think like he certainly is the one who, he built his chops up at Image, and then brought
Mm.
that voice to Marvel and continued to refine it at Marvel.
Mhm.
And I think,
Mm.
like Fantastic Four was a level up in all that. And then I think he kind of was tried and tested through Avengers, and then X-Men is just like this whole quantum leap ahead,
Right.
that all speaks to like that growth he had in the creator owned trenches. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think even like 3W3M, I think that I'm sure has like impacted his post Krakoa,
Mhm.
output, where you see it in Gods, or you see it in Ultimate Spider-Man or Imperial.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think iron kind of sharpens iron in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, like obviously, like people get very picky about their X-Men books, you know that. um, but the I really enjoyed at least what I've read of the Krakoa era, right?
Oh
I've
yeah.
really enjoyed it a lot. And I think though that like love it, hate it, whatever, like I don't think I've seen something change in a such a major line of books in a long time.
Oh
Maybe
yeah.
since like No Man's Land in Batman in the 90s, where like the entire thing was just everything was so different and changed, and
Yeah.
like they let him they cut him loose. I mean,
Yeah, it's such an interesting reboot and well, not reboot, but an interesting revamp.
right.
And like X-Men in particular has always, I think, been really ripe for that sort of stuff. I mean,
Mhm.
because Morrison did a sea change, I think, to a lesser extent, but it was
Mhm.
still at the time, with New X-Men, scene, it was
Mm.
just as like avant-garde and just as
right.
off the beaten path. And then even, you see Joss Whedon, even the way that Joss brought it back to the status quo, it still felt like a very different, I think, and John Cassaday, I think, is a huge part of that. But that was like that, even that felt a little bit like a sea change, despite it going back to the status quo. But yeah, I think, I mean, I always say that House of X and Powers of X, that's what got me through the pandemic, that was, and I think that's the thing that certainly for me, career wise, is something that like what I wouldn't give to be able to do a big swing like that, and I think, you know, I think that's the holy grail. I think everybody, you see it in the biggest lines, the biggest books in the industry are the ones that are taking the biggest swings like that.
Right.
And so, and I think that's something that like we're able to do to a certain extent with our nostalgia books, is that like, because the people aren't as precious about it, and because any licensor that wants to do these books, any licensor worth their salt, is there, as long as you're like staying true to like the spirit of it.
Yeah.
Like I think every licensor I've worked with has been very interested and eager to be like, how do we tell this in the most modern and interesting way possible? And so, yeah, and I think it's when you don't have to deal with sort of the various, just all the assorted moving parts of it all, it's a lot easier, I think, to kind of come to that.
Right.
That sort of that pure status quo, and then just figuring out like, how do I tweak this in a way that feels interesting but doesn't feel like a completely different book, that doesn't feel like it betrayed the principles of the core concept, but still has room for an interesting storytelling engine of different adventures that you can put them on. That's really the $1 million question on every book. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes like there are other forces that kind of you can't account for. Sometimes it's just a sales thing, sometimes like I've talked about it openly before, like I was contracted to write Punisher for 4 issues, but like we had done some preliminary talk about like relaunching as an ongoing afterwards, but then my editor Tom, he took over X-Men, so he didn't have the bandwidth to do Punisher anymore, and the office that Punisher was handed off to, they didn't have the bandwidth to add on another Punisher book at the time, so sort of like that moment kind of passed, and that's just stuff that like you can't control. That's just that's just the choppy seas of writing in comics. So but that's the other sort of we talked about books being a miracle. Sometimes just a book continuing until its planned conclusion. That's a miracle in and of itself, in these unprecedented times. So but that Hickman stuff is I think is generational. I think we will look back on that run with as like a highlight, as like an industry highlight. Hickman forever.
Yeah. Well, I saved possibly the most important question for last. So obviously we have Blip in Space Ghost.
Yeah.
Right. We have Chim Chim in Speed Racer. Which monkey sidekick do you want to write next?
Well, and I have 2 other monkey books too, because Mati has Suchi in Captain Planet, and then I have a bunch of winged monkeys in the OZ. So I really am kind of like comics' leading monkey laureate. I'm trying to think of like what other like monkey sidekicks could I possibly write.
So I did have an idea, and it actually I think works well because Dynamite does a lot of the Disney license books. So are you going to write an Aladdin? Yeah,
I could write Aladdin. Absolute Flash. I don't know if you read that. Wally's got
I
a
haven't read
monkey
that
sidekick now.
yet. Does he really?
Yeah,
Nice.
Ultimate Grodd. Adorable. Ultimate Grodd. I was like, see, they see the vision.
Yeah.
I feel like either of those would be fun. I'd love to write like the main Flash book. So
Yeah.
I'd write Grodd there in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I picked up Speed Racer and Captain Planet within about a week of each other. Like both
Okay.
books kind of came up last San Diego Comic-Con, and I remember my wife being like, "You're writing a lot of monkeys right now," and I was like, "Yeah, it's like it's a little weird. It's not really the niche I like expected for myself." But yes, 4 monkey books in 1 year. When the OZ's Kickstarter returns, it's a niche.
Yeah.
It's a niche, for sure. So, I, it's comics. What can you do?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey man, I really appreciate you you coming on and
Sure.
and talking comics and talking about Speed Racer. So Speed Racer comes out at the end of this month on the 30th, correct?
Yes.
Great,
And I've been
great.
told on
So
good
July
authority.
30th, it's in shops.
Yes, that'll be out July 30th. I've been told on good authority that Space Ghost Annual and Captain Planet 2 will be out next Wednesday on the 23rd. So, knock on wood, those dates won't shift anymore. Now that Dynamite is over at Lunar for periodical sales, and Simon and Schuster, they just announced for their book sales. So hopefully all that will smooth out sooner versus later. But yes, I'm really excited for people to get to read these books. We put a lot of love into them. Between me and Jonathan Lau on Space Ghost, and Aman Casalos on Captain Planet, and David Tinto on Speed Racer. You've got 3 top shelf artists on these books, so I'm really excited for people to see what we got planned.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. And everyone watching, thanks for joining, and everyone have a good night.
Have a good one.